All right, it's time to talk about Corvid Court. I made an arrangement or a deal to myself that I wanted to do a designer commentary for all of my big games that I released this year. I did Score before, so I just put that up a couple days ago. So if you want to see what my first game was and how it got to be, then go check out that video. This is Corvid Court, which came out like 3 months after Score, 2 or 3 months after Score, and was my first foray into designing a full game kind of truly by myself. Score, I largely designed by myself, but I had my good friend Mike Riemann who helped me with some of the design stuff, and then obviously was a huge asset with layout. What you see here on the screen is technically the second version of Corvid Court. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. There's actually probably going to be a third version, but that won't be until next year. This is Corvid Court, and it's by me. But this project, this version that you're seeing here, is certainly not entirely by me. I like talking about the inner cover stuff when I do this because I think it's important to point out who I made this game for or who let me make this game. I think a big part of these special thanks are the people that allowed me to make these games in the first place. So right away, the first people I recognize are Rowan, Rook, and Deckard, which are the creative force behind games like Spire and most recently Heart, because they made the Resistance system, which, if you know me at all, you know I'm a ridiculously huge fan of. And so this is my first foray into making a hack of a game rather than something that's unique like Score was. This is me wanting to make a version of somebody else's system. And the Resistance toolbox came out to help with that. Obviously, I always thank my very incredibly supportive partner, Kate. And then lastly is the Black Veil. And they are a group of friends of mine who were some of my earliest role players who got me thinking about like weirdness and occultism and kind of the grimier side of role playing without being murder hobos, but about making it interesting. So they were a huge inspiration for how I thought about things like Corvid Court. Obviously, there's the acknowledgement that this is made with the Resistance toolbox. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Like I said, I wrote this, and this is the second version. This is the much better, much more interesting layout, the improved layout done by Maria. I will make sure that I post her Twitter and everything below in the comments so that you can check out her work. It's fantastic. Maria not volunteered, but came forward when I was asking for people who knew how to do layout, and immediately was coming up with these just fantastic ways of interpreting the world of Corvid Court, much better than the kind of very simple plain version that I did before. So you're going to see as we flip through this that this is a very different, but I think much more on brand of interpretation of what Corvid Court is supposed to be. So let's talk about it. And right away, we're seeing this is what I mean by the layout. So Maria does this fantastic sort of collage style layout with the art in the book that are all coming from images, as you can see here from Unsplash. So we're getting cool stock photos, but used in creative ways rather than just a standard stock photo on its own. They're overlapping, they're collaging, and you're going to see a lot of cool examples of this. And so what exactly is Corvid Court? It's a game that came out of my head from a couple of places. And it's strange listening back. These last few days I've been listening to Grant Howitt and Chris Taylor talk about their design philosophy behind Spire and Heart. They're the reason I'm doing this design commentary stuff, because they did it and I thought it was an interesting idea. And listening to them read through Spire a long time ago, I'm realizing that a lot of those things must have just kind of like sat in my head, because apparently there is a thing in Spire, like a small section on a group called the Corvid Court. They're very different than what's in this book, but I was clearly incepted by the ideas of Spire, because you have like the Corvid Court, and one of the abilities that on one of my classes is actually an ability that you see in the Bound class in Spire. So I was obviously inspired by Spire when making Corvid Court. But what actually drove me to make this game, weirdly enough, is the game Destiny. And it's not anything that has to do with the gameplay of Destiny, there's an animation that you can choose when your character spawns in, and one of them is you like appear in a burst of crows, essentially, like just a cloud of crows emerge and then out of the ground, and you emerge in amongst that cloud of crows. And that's where Corvid Court came from. I had burned into my brain this idea of somebody who basically just burst into clouds of crows, and I wanted to make a game around that concept. Incredibly loose concept, but I wanted to make something around that. And so Corvid Court, as a result, was written basically in 2 feverish nights where I just sat down and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And I had the whole thing written and did my really basic layout in 2 days. And then I put it out to the world. When I originally put it out on its own, and then put it out in the large itch bundle that happened over the summer, the Black Lives Matter bundle. And so that's where a lot of people ended up seeing Corvid Court. And as that happened, as it was getting out there, and I realized a lot of people were looking at it, I wanted it to look better. And that's how we get to this version. That's how we get to this version where Maria made it infinitely cooler looking and much more in line with what it's supposed to look like. So what is this game about? You are bad people doing bad things to even worse people, essentially. It takes place in a city environment where you are essentially a crime syndicate. You're the Corvid Court, and you are going to do crime for people. As you can tell now, this is 2 videos in a row of games about crime. I have a type. And you're going to go around and you're going to do just like these truly monstrous acts to really monstrous people. And that's the game. It uses resistance. And I say that it's resistance born because I don't think there's technically a phrase like powered by the apocalypse or forged in the dark. I don't know if there's a phrase for games made with resistance because I don't know if there are many of them out there. So I just call this resistance born, and really it's more of a resistance light. So if you're familiar with the concepts of how Spire and Heart work using the resistance system, a lot of Corvid Court will seem familiar, but it's a very slimmed down version of it. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I had no intention when I was writing Corvid Court of writing a full big beast of a book like you see with Spire and Heart. I just wanted to make this really quick, light, mean game, essentially. And so your birds is what I call it. Your characters are called birds. And I mentioned right away at the beginning, are you actually playing as birds? And I never actually answer that question. I'm not going to answer that question here either. The game is up to you to decide if you're birds or if you're bird-themed people. That's up to you. But you're going to be doing crime. You're going to be doing bad stuff. And very specifically, you just need 6-sided dice for this. I wanted it, again, to be fast and lean. Okay, so how does this work? How is this different than a standard resistance system, and where did it come from? So resistance games are all about bands of success, and when you fail, you're getting stress, and stress builds up in these resistance tracks. So I'm following the same sort of thing, but with a D6. So you have a limited amount of opportunities for what your bands of success are. And basically, you're getting success or stress all the time, unless you're rolling 6s all the time. And basically, you're putting together these small dice pools based off of skills and domains, and you pick the highest die out of the roll. At any time you get this stress when your highest die isn't a 6, you mark 1 box of stress in your resistance tracks, and then you check to see if there's a problem. And this is where I start to divert away from the resistance system, because resistance uses variable stress. You get stress from sources, and you roll to see how much stress you inflict and how much stress you take. So there's variability in that. And in Corvid Court, it's just you to get 1 stress anytime you mess things up. And so we're scaling things down here. And I want to point out, just unrelated to the rules, you can see with this, like, look here on the right page, how the text is like overlapping with this text frame here. It juts up right up against it, even overlaps it a little bit. Over here, it's just slightly off of it. And this is totally intentional. Maria did such a fantastic job of making this feel off. It's supposed to feel strange. The city that this takes place in is uncomfortable. The game itself is uncomfortable, and I think Maria did just a fantastic job of highlighting that. And you get cool art like this with this jaw in a jar, and the levels or the lines themselves are uneven. I think that's perfect. I love this sort of art book, art punk sort of style that she went with. The other big deviation that I had with Corvid Court that I wanted was, and this is a thing that I've always kind of had a slight hang up with Resistance, is anytime players get stress, you have to see if they get fallout, because fallout is the cool thing about Spire, is you get these big interesting complications after you build up a certain amount of stress, and the GM always rolls to see if you've triggered it. And what I wanted to do is, again, this is to go faster, I wanted the player to do it immediately. And so when I'm doing something is actually similar to what we see in like Trophy, or what you see with the Arcanist class in my game Slayers, where you're rolling and then you're comparing the highest die of the roll that determines the success or everything, to the amount of stress that you have in that track. And if that highest die is less than or equal to the amount of stress you have, you've got a problem on your hands, which means you could start triggering fallout right away if you just happen to roll really low and you've already got a couple of points of stress. That's because these characters are meant to break. They were designed to not last a long time. Sort of similar to how I built Score. I'm not looking to make games that are going to take you years and years and years to play a campaign out of. I want them to be fast, quick, resolved, and satisfying. And so Fallout comes more easily, more quickly, and it's understood if Fallout happens more quickly and easily, I think, with this system, rather than having player roll, mark some stress, and then GM roll and secretly determine if the fallout is happening. I'm really happy with this fallout system as compared to Spire. And I'm still working on some Resistance born. God, I need a better name for that. Resistance style games. And I'm continuing to like this version of Fallout more so than the sort of out of the box version that you see with the Resistance toolkit. So hey, there's one of our first corvids, like our first actual birds in the book here. How do you get rid of stress? It's the same thing that we see in Spire and everything like that. It's about, you could either rest, you could take Fallout, and when you take Fallout, you lose stress. Or I go the Spire approach, and all the classes have a refresh, a thing that defines what their class is all about. And when they do that, they get to relieve some stress. I said that this is the second version of the game, and one of the things that makes this the second version is not only the layout was updated, but there's more stuff in it than when I first originally made this. I think when I first made this, there were only 4 skills, and Resistance games are made out of skills and domains, and I upped it to 7. So there's 7 skills, all along the lines of bird-like words for the most part. And then you'll notice that decidedly there is a word just called murder. It's just, that is what you do in this game. It's for killing, harming, and lashing out. So I'm trying to set the tone immediately with these skills. You're bird-like people, but also you do the real bad stuff if you have to do it. Here's where we see our domains, and the domains work the same way that we see Inspire and stuff like that. They're more like what you know or where you're doing things rather than like a specific skill. I love this art so much. The Plague Doctor mask that's with just money in the eyes is so perfect. You might be somebody who has a coin domain then in that case. Here's one of my favorite things that I wrote about Corvid Court, and this came in the second version. It was made more clear in the second version. What is combat like in these games? Because in other Resistance games, combat rules are very short because they're not combat-focused games, and Corvid Court is even lighter than that. It's 2 paragraphs. And really, the intent here is that if you're trying to hurt somebody, you're probably trying to murder them, and if you succeed, you're done. You did it. The thing is done. Unless you're talking about trying to take on some big, crazy, powerful person, you should probably just do one roll and move on. This game is, again, meant to be quick. It's meant to be light. And so I made it very clear here in the combat section. This is not a long dragged out sort of thing. You're just offing people and moving on to the next thing. And I think that's, again, sort of to highlight the importance of what I was going for with this game. God, this is haunting and beautiful at the same time. So, what does a character in Corvid Court look like? They originally were just 4 birds. There were 4 birds that I had, 4 different birds from the Corvid, and I think it's the Corvid family. Might be, yeah, maybe the family. And they were, so you got like a crow, a raven, a jay, and a magpie. And that was kind of just originally, that was all that it was. In version 2, I added the concept of the background, which is pretty typical in Resistance games. It's either your Durance in Spire or it's your Calling in Heart. And so I added that here with the background. What did you do before the Corvid Court saw you? So the idea is that you're brought into the Corvid Court. Nobody joins the court, like you don't seek them out. The idea is that you're deemed valuable, and then you get brought in because of some skills, so something that you did beforehand. So all of these backgrounds give you some skills or domains, but then more importantly, they give you questions to answer, things that immediately tell us about your character and help us understand why you would have joined the court or why the court joined you. Like, for example, a trader. Let's just say you were a merchant of some kind. What you traded in is interesting, but what is more interesting is who you know that the court says, we want this person in our group because they know X, Y, and Z, and that's a valuable connection that we can use in the future. So I like this with the a lot of these questions are framed around this idea of why the court sought you out rather than why did you seek out the court. And God, look, the text just goes well outside the frame. And when I first showed this to some of my graphic design friends who are, I think, more traditional graphic designers, it drove them crazy. One of them even offered, like, I'll fix this for you, Spencer. Like, I'll don't worry, I'll update this and make it look better. And I was like, no, this is exactly what I want it to look like. I want it to look wrong. I want it to look off. So just once again, gushing about what a good job Maria did with this book. So then you choose your class, the bird that you want to be. And each class has some skills, some domains, the same things that we see in other, most games. You get to choose one ability to start with, and then equipment. And equipment here is the same thing that I thought about with score. It serves literally no mechanical purpose, and I think that's different than other Resistance games. Like, Resistance games are largely equipment based off of tags, which is really cool. Like, I think in a bigger Resistance game, a tag focused equipment system is neat. I infinitely prefer that over a highly detailed inventory system or anything like that. But this, again, is a lighter version of Resistance. It's meant to move fast. And so you just have equipment that just is there to define you as a character. It's never going to help you. It's never going to give you an extra die in your roll or anything like that. It's purely so that we understand this bird. Once you've got your bird put together, it's time to go to work. So the 4 classes I came up with, what I did to create them is I looked up different Corvids, essentially. I wanted to figure out what are the different Corvids out there. Maybe the most common ones, things that people are they're gonna see, they're gonna understand, and then how is it going to translate to a type of class? They still sort of land in sort of archetypes, I would say, as in terms of like the role they fit in the party. So for example, crows, they are made to murder. They have the murder skill for a reason. So these are the mean ones. And I mean, I was actually walking my dog the other day, and there were just a shit ton of crows out. And if you've ever gotten close to a crow, they are big, mean birds. If you get close to them, they can be really terrifying. And so this was going to be the mean bird. This was going to be the mean class that's all about hurting people. And so the refresh comes in this idea of destroying things, destroying people who would oppose the court. You are the thugs, the muscle, the force of the Corvid Court. And so every class has a core ability that makes them who they are, and then 4 abilities. So you can already see that you're not advancing a whole lot. In fact, every course or every class in terms of their advances, that you only have 6 you can take. You can get the other abilities, you can get one more domain, one more skill than what you start with, and then one more that's like, this is the skill that you're supposed to be really good at, so have an extra die, as opposed to using knacks and things like that that we see in other Resistance games. One of my favorite skills that the crow has is the last one. It's only once per session, so it's not like a big investment, but if you want to do it, you can just engulf somebody in crows. You just like open up your coat and just crows come flying out, or you call upon a bunch of crows and they just come eat the person. It's great. Ravens, as I kind of say here, they're the opposite of crows. Ravens are all corvids are just wildly intelligent birds. And so I chose the raven to be the representative of the sort of intelligent class, the class that is all about puzzles and planning and stuff like that. Because if you've ever seen videos, there's awesome videos of ravens and other corvids solving puzzles. They're really good at it. If you try and keep them out from something, they will get into it. If you keep something away from them, they'll get to that thing. So the Raven is supposed to be sort of the planning class, but I also did play into that idea of the puzzle solving as part of what they can do. So they're all about finding secrets. They plan ahead, so that's why they don't get fallout right away. They can't trigger fallout when you only have 1 or 2 stress in a track, unlike other classes where that's entirely possible, because it's hard to outthink a raven is the idea. So here's the class ability that I accidentally stole from the Bound I learned, which is when you touch a door, it unlocks. And then you can also lock doors so that only you can go through. This is the idea that ravens can solve puzzles. And so they can get access to things. That's where the inspiration came from, but apparently it's also a Bound class ability. This is also the class that got the germ of inspiration, the bursting into a cloud of birds. It went to the raven. So the raven can burst into this cloud of ravens and appear somewhere else. And so this is a class that just has a personal place in my mind in my heart, because I love ravens in general. There's actually a cognitive psychology task that is called the Raven's Progressive Matrices, not because of the bird, but because the people that made it are named Raven. But it just happens to work out well that there's this insight solving puzzle task in my field that is named after ravens, kind of accidentally. So this one is always just kind of a special place for me. Jays were fun to think of. And I think the Jay art is probably my favorite art in the whole book. This is just like this ridiculous character kind of leaning forward. They've got a cane in their hands out in the middle of nowhere, and then there's just a little bird for where their head is. And jays are so fun. The idea of a jay birds are loud. They're very vocal birds. So this is going to be a class that's very vocal. And they're the talker, but they don't. I think mostly when you think about face classes, they're usually like the smooth talker who can get their way into any situation. And that's part of what you could do here. But also you can see with some of your stuff, you just caw with mad jabbering. And when that happens, you can hurt people, you can drive them crazy, you can root them in place. The idea is that you have the words that you say have power to them. And I had somebody point out that the last ability seems wildly overpowered. And I guess it is, but I don't care, because Corvid Court is, again, supposed to be this light, fast, chaotic game that, yeah, once per session you can see a single sentence, no more than 7 words, and it's true. And I think if you're a traditional gamer, you might look at that and go, well, that's overpowered. That seems not fair. It's like getting a wish spell every session. Yeah, it is. But I think if you're sitting down to play Corvid Court, you and the other players have a sense of kind of what you're going for and what you're capable of. And I think a good J is going to use this for a more interesting thing rather than just to say, I win, right? That's no fun. So the J is, I think, is a super cool class. And then there's the Magpie, last one, which is all about coveting things and collecting things. Magpies, they collect stuff. They put together these awesome displays, and they love building nests out of things that they find. So the magpie character is going to be about that. They're going to be about the power of things, of ownership of things, the power of possessions, and how they can use that. So, part of it is just understanding what is valuable around you. Like they have that radar. But I think the cool stuff is in the power of transaction that you see with the magpie. So, for example, when somebody takes a coin from you, they have to obey a single word that you say. Or if you get something from somebody, you always know where they are. It's I think that's a really cool way of thinking about how magpies work as these very kind of covetous beings that enjoy their trinkets, but they also like displaying these things. And so that's part of what I'm trying to capture here with this class is this person isn't just hoarding things because they're the greedy rogue. They're hoarding things and then spreading things because they know that there's power in possession. They know that there's power in transaction. And I think that's kind of what I was going for with the magpie. So the game kind of wraps up after that. That's mostly what you need to know. I didn't write a big long setting section or anything like that. And basically the game or you advance every time the game, the session is over. And once you finish a session, you get one of those advances and then you move on. So there's no XP track. There's no asking questions afterwards to see if you unlock advances or anything like that. You just get stuff, which is again a diversion from how resistance works, because resistance is supposed to be like with Spire. You get an advance when you make meaningful changes to the city, and for me it's just you get stuff because you're only going to play this class for maybe like 1 to 5 sessions max probably, and then you're done. I give some advice on how to play the game, how to expand on it if you want. Come up with your own corvids, come up with your own birds. Maybe it doesn't have to be a corvid. Maybe you want to make a kingfisher, right? Kingfishers are really cool birds. So what would a kingfisher bird in this system look like? What would be its core ability? What is it all about? Why is this kingfisher, which is not a corvid, working with the Corvid Court? Maybe there are other agencies out there in the setting. Maybe there are other courts or syndicates that are related to other bird families. Like there's a whole thing about owls maybe, or raptors, right? I think that would be really neat for somebody to make stuff like that. It's something that I'm rattling around in my brain when I make kind of like the full big version of this game, but it's what I want to encourage people to do that. So expanding on the game like that. And then I talked about the setting, which is the city of Nest, which is not actually like you don't have to play in the setting. It's because there's not a lot there. All I tell you is that it's some sort of layered city. Makes sense because you're birds, so you kind of want to think about how you would move around. Are you actually birds? Who knows? Again, reinforcing that point that you're brought into the court. The city's weird, so there's a lot of occult stuff going on. I mentioned things like the Cult of Crimson Spire, which is just an allusion to another game that I had written earlier, a one-page game. I guess it's technically 2 pages. And then I took that idea, and I just have since then I've put the Corvid Court in, I think, every game that I've ever made because I just love the concept of the Corvid Court. So then I leave the city open to the players to do with what they will. And I think one of the coolest things that I've seen is people who play this not in this setting. I've heard one person reached out and they used Corvid Court as sort of an interlude thing to set up their D&D campaign. It might have been like the next arc of their D&D campaign. It was going to take place in the city, and it was going to be this. There was going to be this event that destabilized the city. And so the players played Corvid Court to kind of set that up. And then after that, the players took on their actual D&D characters, which were not these birds, but they got to see kind of behind the curtain how the city got messed up the way that it did, which I thought was really cool. There's another uh, there's a whole host of ways that you could do this, right? There's a whole host of ways that you can incorporate the game, and so I'm always excited to hear what people do with it. And then here it is, super simple character sheet, and then you're done. That's Corvid Court, and then I get my catchphrase at the end that Maria puts on this really spooky, misty background: "Birds of a feather kill together." So that's Corvid Court, a game that uh, apparently was incepted into my mind because of my love of Spire, but came about because of my obsession with a single animation from the game Destiny that in 2 days I turned into a real light resistance game. Then that got turned into this neat art punk book. And I'm really, really excited about it. It's not the last you're going to hear or see of Corvid Court. I've got a kind of a plan on how to expand it into a full game proper. But I won't be doing that until next year or anything like that. So I hope you enjoyed this commentary. I hope you learned a couple of things. I enjoyed talking about Corvid Court. I'm trying to think of what's going to be the next game, and I can't answer that off the top of my head. So hopefully you'll see another one of these commentaries soon. Bye.